Redstone Bay looks peaceful, but Detective Mara Ellison knows the truth buried under its streets. When Officer Daniel Kerwin uncovers a hidden tunnel network after a road collapse, the investigation points to Elias Ward, a former development officer who vanished 20 years earlier. As the team follows old maps, abandoned chambers, and coded notes, they realize the tunnels were built for more than movement. Someone used them to hunt, hide, and disappear without a trace. And the group behind Elias did not simply vanish. They left something waiting in the dark. Redstone Bay looked calm on the surface, but the peace felt thin, almost fragile. People moved through their daily routines, yet their eyes carried a quiet worry that never faded. It started with one missing person, then another, and then another. Within 3 months, the number reached 7. Each disappearance happened without warning, without noise, and without any clue that could guide investigators in a clear direction. The strangest part was the pattern. Every missing person vanished inside a small zone known as the Old Harbor Block, a rundown part of town that most residents avoided unless they had no choice. The first case involved a schoolteacher who left home early to pick up breakfast and never returned. Her car was found a few blocks away, with the engine still running. A week later, a construction worker disappeared while heading to a late-night shift. His tool bag was discovered on the pavement, neatly placed as if he had stepped away for a moment. The third case involved a tourist who was last seen walking near the waterfront. By the time police reviewed the limited camera footage, there was only a blurry outline turning a corner and then nothing. The same empty trail repeated with every new report. Residents began to avoid Old Harbor Block entirely. Shops closed early. Streets emptied before sunset. Even the usual flow of fishermen at the docks grew thin. People said the air in that part of town felt wrong, heavy in a way that tugged at the nerves. Some blamed criminal groups passing through the area. Others mentioned wild animals coming down from the cliffs, though no tracks or evidence supported the idea. A few whispered about something older, something tied to the abandoned warehouses and the hollow, sound you sometimes heard beneath your feet. When you walked near the old fish processing plant, the police brought in additional officers and expanded search teams. Dogs were used, drones were flown, and volunteers combed the coastline and forest edges. Every effort returned the same result: nothing. There were no signs of struggle, no trails, and no belongings left behind except for the few items already found near the disappearance points. The consistency of the losses unsettled investigators. Random crimes usually carried mistakes. This felt too clean, almost practiced. Journalists arrived from nearby cities and tried to build stories from the little information available. The town became a point of curiosity and fear and national attention. Some reporters called it the province's danger capital. The name stuck, and the weight of it settled on the locals. Redstone Bay was no longer a quiet coastal town. It was a place people watched with suspicion. What bothered investigators most was the lack of connection among the victims. They did not live close to one another. They did not work in related fields. Their ages, routines, and backgrounds were completely different. There was no shared motive to explain why they were chosen or how the person responsible managed to take them without leaving a trace. The only shared element remained the location. Every disappearance occurred within a tight cluster of old streets that few people cared to explore. Any more got behind the boarded windows, peeling paint, and cracked sidewalks of Old Harbor Block. Something was operating with precision. No one understood what it was yet, but it moved with purpose. And whatever lived beneath the surface of Redstone Bay had only begun to show itself. The collapse happened just after sunrise, when the streets were still quiet and most people were only beginning their day. A delivery truck rolled over a section of road inside Old Harbor Block, and the ground gave way without warning. The front wheels sank first, then the entire vehicle dropped into a deep opening that split the pavement like wet paper. Alarms echoed through the block as the driver crawled out, shaken but alive. When emergency crews arrived, they expected a simple sinkhole caused by old pipes or weakening soil. What they found forced them to shut down the entire area within minutes. The hole did not look natural. Its edges were sharp, as if cut from below. A narrow passage extended from the bottom, reinforced with wooden beams and sandbags that had been packed with careful precision. The structure looked old, yet parts of it were clean, suggesting someone had maintained it until recently. A rescue worker climbed down with a headlamp and radio, and the quiet that followed lasted too long. When he finally spoke, his voice carried confusion more than fear. He saw a tunnel built by hand, wide enough for a person to walk upright, with walls that stretched farther than his light could reach. Investigators arrived within hours and began exploring the passage. The floor was smooth, flat, and dusty, almost untouched by natural erosion. They found pieces of clothing buried in the dirt along with cracked flashlights and a few scattered coins. The items looked like they belonged to different people, and some matched descriptions from missing persons reports. That possibility changed the tone of the investigation immediately. The sinkhole was no longer an isolated accident. It was evidence of something intentional beneath Redstone Bay. Survey teams were called in to map the area. They used equipment that could scan underground spaces, and the results shocked everyone involved. The single tunnel connected to several more. Some branched off toward old warehouses. Others ran under shops that had been closed for years. A few extended toward the waterfront, close to places where earlier disappearances were recorded. The network was much larger than anyone expected, and far too planned to be the work of a single person. Authorities closed off the block and brought in structural experts. They believed part of the network had weakened over time, causing the collapse. This meant the tunnels had existed for many years, possibly decades, without anyone noticing. The idea created a new problem. If the tunnels were that old, then they were likely built during a period when records were poorly kept, making it hard to trace who started the construction or why. Forensic teams returned to the area repeatedly. Each visit revealed something new. Food wrappers from different years, old lanterns with dried fuel, fresh footprints in the dust that did not match any rescue worker. That last discovery chilled investigators. It suggested that someone had used the tunnels recently, possibly after the last disappearance. Word spread through Redstone Bay faster than officials could control it. Residents gathered behind the barricades, whispering about secret routes under the town. Some feared a hidden criminal group. Others believed the tunnels were connected to older stories passed through families, stories about smuggling routes used long before the town was modernized. Whatever the truth was, the sinkhole marked the first real break in the case. The darkness beneath Old Harbor Block was no longer a rumor. It was a physical structure, carefully built and disturbingly active. And now that it had been exposed, investigators knew the network was much bigger than they had imagined, and far more dangerous. Mapping the tunnels became the largest investigation Redstone Bay had ever seen. Teams worked in rotating shifts, moving through the narrow passages with cameras, sensors, and portable markers. The deeper they went, the clearer it became that the network had been built with intention. Some sections were rough and old, with crumbling wooden beams and stones scattered along the floor. Others were strangely clean, as if someone had cleared them only weeks earlier. The contrast gave the impression of a system that had been expanded and upgraded over many years. The tunnels stretched in all directions. Some ran under busy streets where residents walked every day without knowing what lay beneath them. Others reached toward the cliffs at the edge of town. A few slipped below closed shops and abandoned homes that looked harmless from the outside. Investigators found turns, dead ends, and narrow passages that connected to larger chambers. Every new discovery added to the unsettling realization that the network was not random. It was engineered with a purpose that no one could yet define. Within the first major chamber, officers discovered rows of old shelves built from mismatched wooden planks. The shelves held lanterns with cracked glass, empty metal cans, dried food wrappers, and small tools. Dust covered most of it, but a few items looked newer, as if they had been used recently. In one corner, investigators found a stack of wallets and ID cards that belonged to several missing people. The condition of the items suggested they had been brought there at different times. Not all at once. Further down, another chamber revealed something even more unsettling. It was larger, cleaner, and better supported than the others. The walls had been reinforced with fresh planks, and the dirt floor had been flattened, as if someone had walked through it repeatedly. In this room, investigators found water containers, rope, batteries, and a set of printed maps showing the layout of the town above. The maps were marked with small circles around certain streets, many of them linked to the disappearance sites. The presence of these supplies raised more questions than answers. If the network was being used by a group, why had they suddenly abandoned it? If it was a single person, how had they managed to create and maintain something so extensive without drawing attention? Each discovery suggested organization, planning, and long-term activity. Nothing pointed to carelessness or panic. Teams continued exploring, and the deeper sections showed signs of more recent construction. Fresh lumber supported certain walls. Patterns in the dust showed clear footprints, but they were never complete enough to match. Some footprints overlapped older ones, creating a confusing trail that investigators struggled to interpret. The town above remained tense. Streets emptied earlier than usual. Residents avoided the old harbor block entirely. Even people who lived far from the area walked with more caution. Fear settled over Redstone Bay like a cold fog, spreading steadily as news about the tunnels leaked to the public. What unsettled investigators most was the organized layout. The tunnels were not the work of bored teenagers or survivalists. They formed a grid, like a hidden version of the town mapped beneath the real one. Every chamber seemed to serve a purpose: storage, passage, observation, movement. It became clear that whoever built the network had studied Redstone Bay closely. They had created a shadow version of the town, hidden from the surface and connected in ways no one had ever suspected. The more investigators uncovered, the more they realized they were dealing with something that had been allowed to grow completely unnoticed. And still, the biggest question remained unanswered. What had the tunnels been used for, and why had the group behind them vanished, right when the truth was starting to come to light? The deeper the teens moved into the underground system, the more the atmosphere changed. The upper tunnels felt old but structured, almost like forgotten utility lines. The lower sections felt different. The air grew colder, the walls damp and streaked with dark minerals. Footsteps echoed longer, carrying a hollow ring that made every investigator slow down without meaning to. The narrow passages eventually opened into a wider space where the ground became soft, sinking slightly under each step. Water dripped from the ceiling in steady rhythms, forming small pools that reflected the dim light of the HEADLAMPS. This was where they found the flooded chamber. The room stretched wider than any other space in the network. The water reached halfway up the investigators' boots and carried a metallic smell that hinted at rusted equipment lying beneath the surface. The light revealed scattered cages, all in different states of decay. Some were collapsed. Others tilted awkwardly on twisted legs. A few still stood upright, but were covered in layers of grime and algae from years of moisture. The discovery unsettled even the most experienced officers. The cages were not meant for animals common to the area, and they were too large to be linked to anything explained by local wildlife control. Marks along the floor told another story. Heavy objects had been dragged through the water, leaving grooves that disappeared into a darker section of the chamber. Forensics collected samples from the water and the metal surfaces. When the first tests came back, the results connected the space to several missing persons. The traces were faint, but strong enough to confirm that victims had been held in the chamber at some point. This discovery shifted the investigation from speculation to grim certainty. The tunnels were not only for movement or storage. They were sites of confinement. A second chamber lay behind a narrow opening that investigators almost missed. The entrance was disguised behind a wall of rotting wood that had softened with time. Once cleared, the space inside revealed a more organized layout. It had no cages, no water, and no signs of struggle. Instead, it held piles of old documents, rolled maps and notebooks filled with handwritten symbols and coded notes. Many pages were ruined by damp air, but some remained intact enough to read. The documents listed property numbers, ownership transfers, maintenance schedules, and marked routes that connected buildings through hidden access points. Some of the properties were familiar to the officers. They were abandoned homes or run-down shops that had been sold, repeatedly through a shell company nobody had questioned. Among the notes was a list of coded names written in careful handwriting. Investigators cross-referenced the codes with public records, and a disturbing pattern emerged. Several of the names matched individuals who had disappeared in earlier years, but were never officially linked to a common case. These findings suggested the tunnel network had been active far longer than the recent disappearances. It had a history that reached back decades. Hidden beneath the town's slow growth and neglect, the discovery raised a chilling new possibility. The people behind the tunnels were not reacting to recent events. They had planned, built, and operated the system quietly for years. They moved through the underground routes as easily as others walked city streets. But now, the tunnels were empty, tools abandoned, supplies untouched. It looked like someone had left in a hurry. Long before authorities discovered the sinkhole, investigators left the chambers with more questions than answers. The tunnels were not just hidden routes. They were part of a larger operation that had shaped the town in ways no one ever imagined. Redstone Bay now had a past it could not ignore, and the truth hidden beneath its streets was far more unsettling than anyone had expected. Tracing ownership of the shell company took weeks, but the breakthrough came from an old stack of municipal records stored in a neglected archive room. A clerk sorting the files noticed a signature that appeared on several project proposals from 2 decades earlier. The same name appeared on the documents linked to the suspicious properties around Redstone Bay. It belonged to a former city development officer who left the job without explanation and disappeared shortly afterward. His exit made little noise at the time. He had been known as a quiet, practical worker, someone who rarely spoke to others. No one realized he had continued influencing the town long after he vanished from public life. Investigators pieced together his history. Years before the first disappearance, he proposed a maintenance system beneath the town to manage drainage and support new construction. The idea was considered expensive, unnecessary, and was rejected. A few months later, he left the city office. What no one knew was that construction had started underground anyway, without permits or oversight. The design matched his proposal, but with modifications that suggested others were involved. People with their own intentions, separate from the city's needs. The officer disappeared from public records, but bank statements, property transfers, and coded notes found in the tunnels suggested he did not work alone. A group had taken over the unfinished project, expanding it carefully and quietly. Some of the names tied to the shell company were fake. Others belonged to residents who had moved away abruptly or died under unclear circumstances. The group had built a structure beneath Redstone Bay that allowed them to move unseen, store equipment, and track people without drawing attention. The strangest part came when investigators tried to determine when the group abandoned the tunnels. None of the supplies found in the chambers were recent. Dust patterns suggested no one had walked the deeper sections for months before the sinkhole appeared. It was as if the group left suddenly, abandoning years of work in a single decision. There were no signs of a struggle, no signs of conflict between members, and no evidence of law enforcement pressure at the time. Something happened that caused them to disappear before the authorities knew anything about the tunnels. Some officers believed the group used the tunnels to escape Redstone Bay completely. The network extended far beyond town limits. Several passages reached areas where soil was too unstable to explore safely. One theory suggested a hidden exit led into the forested cliffs outside the town, giving the group a way to vanish without being seen on any road or camera. Another theory claimed the group was still nearby, hiding in abandoned homes that had been part of the original plan. A few investigators believed the sudden withdrawal meant the group feared exposure from within, not from the police. Internal conflict, betrayal, or a failed mission might have forced them to abandon everything. Despite these theories, nothing concrete was ever found. Search teams reached the outer limits of every safe passage, uncovering no bodies, no camps, and no recent signs of life. It was as though the group dissolved into thin air. Yet the tunnels themselves told a different story. They reflected planning, discipline, and long-term intent. People do not walk away from something so large without a reason. Today, most entrances are sealed with reinforced barriers. But residents still talk about strange sounds under the street's soft vibrations. Faint tapping, the air shifting in ways that do not match the quiet above. These stories keep Redstone Bay on edge. The official investigation remains open, though there is little left to explore without risking collapse. What remains is a chilling understanding. Redstone Bay was shaped by people nobody ever truly knew, people who built a shadow version of the town beneath everyone's feet. The danger did not vanish with them. It lingers in the unanswered questions, in the dark spaces still untouched, and in the unsettling possibility that the network's creators may one day return to the place they once controlled from below.